by leaning into more pipelines, by leaning into fossil fuels, we are consigning ourselves to a more flammable, less stable future. And now there are entire swaths of the United States that cannot even be insured for fire anymore or flood. That is going to change the nature of how we do business and how we feel safe in our communities if we can't insure them. LA, the rebuilding of that place and the reinsuring of Pacific Palisades and Altadena are going to be the poster children for how we negotiate this new reality of increased flammability and uninsurability.
Around the world, people are feeling the heat. According to organizations like NASA, the World Meteorological Organization, and the Copernicus Climate Change Service of the European Union, the year 2024 was the world's hottest on record. 90% of global warming is happening in the ocean. The last 10 years have been the ocean's warmest decade since the 1800s. Arctic sea ice is steadily declining. Glaciers around the world are shrinking or disappearing altogether. I'm Adrian Harewood, and this is In Bed with the Elephant. Carbon dioxide levels are now higher than at any time they've been in 800,000 years. Indeed, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere has risen by about 50% since the start of the Industrial Revolution in the mid-18th century, when human beings started burning large quantities of fossil fuels. Someone who's been paying close attention to climate changes is the U.S.-born, Canadian-based author John Vaillant. In his award-winning 2023 book, Fire Weather: The Making of a Beast, Vaillant tells the story of the gargantuan fire that engulfed Fort McMurray, Alberta, the epicenter of Canada's oil industry, in May 2016. He describes how residents, politicians, civic officials, and firefighters dealt with the cataclysmic event that destroyed 2,400 homes and structures, damaged thousands more, and caused over 100,000 people to flee their homes in what remains the biggest single-day evacuation in the history of modern fire. Fire Weather remains a book for this moment. It's about how we're managing our climate present and what it may mean for our climate future. John Vaillant's work has appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, and National Geographic. He's written 3 books of nonfiction, including The Golden Spruce, a true story of myth, madness, and greed, The Tiger, a true story of vengeance and survival, and the novel Jaguar's Children. He's the recipient of the Governor General Award, the Writers' Trust Nonfiction Prize, and the Windham Campbell Literature Prize. John Vaillant joins us from Vancouver. John, welcome.
Hey, good morning, Adrian. So good to hear your voice.
Great to hear you again, John. John, I know that you've been paying a bit of attention, like millions of your Canadian compatriots, to the election that is upon us. And I'm just curious as to what you make of the election campaign so far, particularly with regard to how our political leaders are talking about climate change or are not talking about climate change.
This has been a really instructive few months, watching the behavior of the United States under its new president and the threatening noises it's made to Canada and to other nations as well, and how the threat to democracy and sovereignty clearly trumps, so to speak, anxiety or attention to climate. That hadn't been so clear to me until now. And I realize, watching this election, watching what's happening down south that's really shaping the course of this election, and just noticing my own feelings and reactions, that you can't deal with climate without a functioning democracy. And so a functioning democracy and sovereignty come first. And that's what's been really clear in the language from Carney and from Poilievre, and the choice is really stark, to say the least. I have no trouble saying Carney, is the man for this moment, and how he has negotiated with Trump, I think, has been excellent. And he's someone I actually quoted several times in Fire Weather, because he's one of the few high-level financiers and dedicated capitalists who is speaking clearly and urgently about the threat climate change poses, not just to our economies, but to our planet. I feel hopeful that once the urgency of having democracy and sovereignty are reestablished because they're precarious right now, we can return to climate, which is a topic he speaks eloquently and urgently about.
You say he's the man for the political moment, but are you giving him too much credit? Is he really the man for the climate moment? This is someone, Mark Carney, who is advocating for more pipelines, is he not? Like, is that not antithetical to your own views as to what should be happening moving forward?
This is the trap that Canada finds itself in. It has historically been a source of energy for itself and for North America. And it is trapped in that industry, and it's in a sense a hostage to that industry. And I recognize why Carney is open to the idea of pipelines and trying, in my view, to basically accommodate, one might say appease Alberta, where he's from originally. But my hope is that once he's established, he'll return to climate. I think he's been beating this drum since 2015 regarding climate. And so I think he is fully cognizant of the threat that a degraded climate poses to Canada and to the world. I can only hope that, once he is in a position to shape Canada's energy policy, he'll behave accordingly. But there's no getting around the historical fact that Canada, and Alberta in particular, is a hostage to the industry in many ways. And when people talk about the 51st state humorously or seriously, I really think the Alberta petroleum industry is the actual 51st state. Alberta goes where the petroleum industry tells it to go, and that's mostly an American industry.
So what you seem to be suggesting, John, is that this particular moment calls for pragmatism, that Mark Carney is aware of the climate emergency, but he also needs to win an election. And in order to win an election, in order to keep the country together, to keep the country unified, he needs to build more pipelines.
He has to say he will. I don't know if he will. Look at the price of oil right now. Look at the tensions and disarray that the United States has thrown the world economy into. The efficacy, viability of more pipelines is in doubt, I think. What I'm hoping is once the election is settled, we can return to the sober and mature conversations that Carney has been having with his peers and with bankers and lawyers and insurance brokers for the past decade.
Can you kind of reflect on the last year or so and think about the kind of year that it has been in terms of the fire weather that we've been experiencing, not just here in Canada, North America, around the world? What kind of 12 months has it been?
It's been a hellacious 12 months. And there are fires that don't even get reported on in the Northern Hemisphere. Angola and Democratic Republic of Congo have had colossal fires. And then all across the United States, there have been fires basically all year. And so, we all are painfully familiar now with the LA fires, which burned 12,000 structures and may end up being the most expensive weather-related disaster in American history. We're looking at a bill all in approaching $250 billion US. And that actually compares with the damage from Hurricane Helene, which trashed the southeastern United States just a couple months prior.
That fire in LA, that hit you hard, John. I was watching your feed, throughout that, and it seemed as if you were really affected by that.
So the fire that affected me the most, was the Fort McMurray fire. And that's because I got to know people who went through it the best. And the suffering those events cause, the trauma they cause, the fear and uncertainty and just residual hassle and damage that they perpetrate is just something you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. It's as bad as a war in a sense. And once that's happened to you, it's very hard to go back to that place and ever feel fully safe or comfortable again. So seeing that happen in LA, it shouldn't be shocking, but it's always shocking. And it was, one thing that really shocked me about that was hearing LA firefighters saying, "I've never seen anything like this." And we all know that Southern California is where big fires have been burning ferociously for decades now. And so to shock an LA firefighter, something really bad had to happen. And something really bad did happen. And so, It's a terrible exclamation point on a litany of smaller disasters that have been happening all over the continent. Just in the past few months, New England, where I'm from, had unprecedented fires all through the month of November. Wildfire fighters were killed in New York and New Jersey in November. It's not fire season in the Northeast by any stretch. South Carolina has had really bad fires. Oklahoma has had really bad fires, including fatalities. The state of New Jersey right now has a fire that's, I think, pushing 10,000 acres and has forced the evacuation of thousands of people. This is happening right now, Adrian, as you and I speak to each other. And again, it's not fire season, but these fires have basically been burning across the continent all year long. We're in a new world now. There's no way to justify further petroleum development in a world like this, where, as you say, the ocean is heating radically and dramatically. When you look at the temperature jumps for global temperature, they are taking bigger and bigger leaps. And CO2 is in a realm that, we haven't seen in a million, if not millions of years.
And John, I would be remiss if I did not mention Jasper, Alberta, which so many people in this country hold very close to their hearts. Someone who's traveled through Alberta, been to Jasper as a teenager, was just struck by the beauty of that place. To see the devastation that fire caused, it was a gut punch.
That fire was kind of like a death in the national family. And so to have that be damaged so grievously is really a wound. Something unique about fire is its ability to invade our space and take things from us all across our spectrum of meaning. So it can impact pipelines and industry. It can impact individual homes and communities like Lytton, BC, which was simply removed from the map, wiped off the map by this fire, has yet to be rebuilt. And then it can also hit us in these kind of emotional and aesthetic ways by destroying places not only of economic or domestic significance, but of aesthetic and spiritual significance. There are not too many hazards besides war, that do that. And fire is really doing it much more often than we've ever seen in our lifetimes.
You've been talking about what a hellacious year it has been around the world for fire. And certainly this country, Canada, has suffered greatly. Many, many communities have been affected. Thousands of people have had to evacuate their spaces, their homes. And yet, in this political moment, it seems as if the emphasis is on ensuring that Canada becomes this energy superpower. There has been so much talk about pipelines in the last couple of months. Pipelines are being presented as a kind of a unifier. It's a way of bringing this country together in the wake of the attacks on the sovereignty of this country by Donald Trump. What do you make of the fact that we're facing this existential crisis when it comes to the climate, and yet in December 2019, 42% of Canadians said climate change was the most important issue, the issue that they cared about the most. Today, it's only 15%. So what do you make of this shift, it seems, in the Canadian mood?
Well, we're really moved, I think, by the news we hear and also by the anxiety we feel. And when a country the size of the United States, with whom we've had enjoyed, for the most part, such a stable and long relationship, turns on you with the ferocity and mercurial randomness with which Trump's America has done, I don't blame Canadians for shifting the focus. It really shifted the focus for me, too. As someone who has allegiance or roots in both countries, it's really clear for me, that Canada's the side that I fall on in a case like that. Historically, Alberta and the petroleum industry have wielded disproportionate power, and there's always been that threat of we're going to take our ball and go home. And you could see it again when a petroleum company refused to go to Jasper because the mayor is speaking openly about climate change. And they say, well, we represent the petroleum industry and we are going to have a conference there. But since you don't seem to respect us, we're taking our business elsewhere. And that is a kind of gaslighting, bullying that Trump is an expert at, that Poilievre emulates, but who invented it was the petroleum industry. And I'm all for Canada being an energy superpower. And I think most people with vision can see that potential, but the potential is in renewable energy. There's no other country that has 3 oceans of potential tidal power that has so much potential sun, water, geothermal, and wind. We're the second largest country in the world by geography with this tiny population. So that makes Canadians the wealthiest per capita in renewable energy in the world. And Carney could be the guy to unlock that, finally.
There are so many fire stories, and you indicated just the number of fires that have happened around the world in the last 12 months. A couple years ago, though, you decided to tell one particular fire story, and that was the story of the aforementioned Fort McMurray, Alberta. Why is the story of Fort McMurray so important? Why is it, to you, a metaphor for the future?
Well, it highlights the collision we're in. You know, on the one hand, we live in a petroleum-driven society and economy. And most of the things that we enjoy right now are because of petroleum. And so one of the first things we need to do is acknowledge that fact of how universal it is in the ways we live, in the ways we make money, in how much money so many of us have. Almost all of that is due to our reliance and access to petroleum. We need to show gratitude for that, and gratitude to the people who work in that industry. At the same time, we have to bravely acknowledge the fact that that industry that has given us so much has created a situation in our atmosphere and in our oceans that's now reducing the gains that we've made. We're now losing the homes that we were able to buy thanks to petroleum. We're losing the forests that give us so much pleasure and that we're able to access thanks to petroleum. We're losing climate stability, which will disrupt all of our ability to live safely and prosperously. The science is in. And so in Fort McMurray, we saw that collision between this very potent town full of an ambitious workforce providing this engine for our economy, both in terms of the fuel, but the power, the economic power of that town. And then this climate-enhanced wildfire that was literally unstoppable took this town that on May 2nd seemed solid and indomitable and in charge. And 24 hours later, it was a ghost town. No other city really anywhere that I know of has emptied out that fast. And again, this is one of the wealthiest municipalities in all of North America. Fort McMurray is a powerhouse and a phenomenon. And to see it undone so rapidly should sober everybody. And then to hear what firefighters had to say about their experience in that fire. Houses burning to the basement in 5 minutes. Flames 100 meters high and coming in a wall that you couldn't see the end of. This is what happened in Los Angeles, too. All you can do in a situation like that is flee. And as numerous firefighters and their media personnel said to me, the firefighting operation became a life-saving operation. And that is really hard on firefighters who are there to fight fire and can't because it's simply too big and doesn't respond to water anymore. And it's obviously incredibly hard on the citizenry who are running literally for their lives. The miracle of Fort McMurray is that there were no fatalities in the flames. And you look at almost any other big fire, they kill people.
Let's talk about the citizenry, because of course your book, Fire Weather, The Making of a Beast, is about fire, it's about climate change, but it's also about people. There's a deep humanity about your book. There's a love, really, I would say, for the community, for the people of Fort McMurray. Talk a little bit more about that community. How would you describe it?
You know, I'm a guy from Vancouver. It's pretty clear where my politics are. And I come into this pretty conservative, quite religious, one industry town, Fort McMurray, after the worst trauma in its history. And to, say, hey, I'm John, tell me about the worst day of your life. And there's a 2-word answer to that, Adrian, that is honestly totally appropriate. And not a single person said that to me. What I got instead were these really moving, insightful, courageous accounts of how they managed, or didn't manage, as the case may have been, this terrible day of May 3rd, there's no way you can't be touched by that. That experience of being essentially kind of welcomed into that community. I didn't know anybody going in there, Adrian. I had no connections to the petroleum industry. And so the key for me was getting to know people and to see the community cohesion. And this is really, something that I think all Canadians should take to heart and be proud of, is not a single person died in the flames in Fort McMurray.
Which is remarkable. It's remarkable.
But here's what's really remarkable about it. In 2016, the number of first languages spoken in that city was 80. 80. There were 80 first languages spoken in Fort McMurray. So how does this polyglot Babel organize itself to get out when you have a half an hour to pack your stuff and go? So you have all these different languages, different religions, different ethnicities, different concepts of how to respond to risk, danger, communal threats. And somehow everybody knocked on someone else's door and got every single person out. A completely successful evacuation is incredible anyway, when you look at other cities and the fatality rates. And then to do that with 80 first languages and all the different religions and concepts and family dynamics is nothing short of miraculous. And I think that's what Canada is. That's the potential of Canada.
And it's the potential of human beings, is it not, John? Like, it's the brilliance of human beings' ability to cooperate. In many ways, that's one of human beings' superpowers.
Adrian, I'm glad you brought that up. Our ability to cooperate and collaborate, across race, gender, language, religion, origin, is what's going to get us through the rest of this century, which promises, not just because of fire, to be a very challenging one. So Fort McMurray, in a way, was, kind of a dry run. A lot of homes were lost. There was a lot of damage. But the most important thing is to get out and be able to hug your kid the next day. And that's what just about everybody did. Focusing on May 3rd, that was just an extraordinary event in so many ways.
The cataclysmic event of May 3rd, 2016, was 9 years ago now. What's changed in Fort McMurray in those 9 years? Paint a picture for us of Fort McMurray in 2025.
You don't talk about it in Fort McMurray. They are in full denial. At the highest levels of government and industry, they are in denial that there is an issue.
How does that manifest itself?
They are focused solely on expansion. Recent rumblings and disconnections with the United States have made China look like a more encouraging customer. You can be sure that people in Fort McMurray and Calgary and Edmonton are interested in that. It's basically business as usual. And yet, even though they've expanded production enormously, I think it's about 4 million barrels a day coming into the United States now from Alberta alone. The industry has shed about 40,000 jobs in Alberta over the past decade. So it isn't really about people, Adrian. It's really about money, and it's really about shareholders, and it's really about owners.
And yet, John, we are implicated, though. You are implicated. I am implicated. I drove to the studio today in my car. I'm planning to head to Vancouver in the next month for an event. I'm taking a plane. You've been traveling around the world, talking about your book. Are you not implicated as well?
I'm totally implicated. But who's setting the terms of how we transport ourselves is the energy industry and the governments and banks who enable the energy industry. So if I was in Japan or China or France or Spain, I could take high-speed rail. And we cannot do that in North America because the incredible rail system that we used to have was undermined and replaced by the automotive industry and the petroleum industry. This is Rockefeller's legacy going back to 1870. I would love to travel in a different way, and that is a real conundrum. But governments, banks, and industries have the leverage to change the way we power ourselves and the way we transport ourselves. And now the electric car, the EV, the ability to generate and store renewable energy at scale is really changing the world. Canada is a laggard in this regard, but Texas, of all places, the first cousin or the twin sibling really of Alberta, is leading the continent in renewable energy development. China, of course, is leading the entire world by orders of magnitude of the speed with which it's electrifying.
But in addition to Texas, you also point out there are other states in the United States that are doing much better than any other province in Canada. You talk about South Dakota as being another example.
Isn't that amazing? So South Dakota, that is not a tree-hugging state. And it's not just because they don't have any trees. It's a pretty conservative place. It's got a small population. But my understanding is it's getting, 80 or 90% of its electricity now from renewable sources.
Wind and solar.
Wind and solar. And so the beauty of it is, there's infinite wind, infinite solar, and Canada, like South Dakota, has a huge amount of space in which to install these technologies. By leaning into more pipelines, by leaning into fossil fuels, we are consigning ourselves to a more flammable, less stable future. And now there are entire swaths of the United States that cannot even be insured for fire anymore or flood. That is going to change the nature of how we do business and how we feel safe in our communities if we can't insure them. LA, the rebuilding of that place and the reinsuring of Pacific Palisades and Altadena are going to be the poster children for how we negotiate this new reality of increased flammability and uninsurability.
Given all that you know, given all that you've written over these last number of years, many people would think that you're someone who believes in doom and gloom. And so it's somewhat counterintuitive. You actually have hope. You actually believe in the possibility.
Oh, I absolutely do, Adrian. The beauty of this world, the power of community that I have witnessed and been the beneficiary of, and also the incredible inventiveness and creativity in terms of ways of making communities more fire resilient, but also in the energy sphere. You wouldn't know it in Alberta, but we are in an energy transition right now globally, moving toward renewable electricity. That's a major project. It's not going to happen in 5 years. That's a generational, if not a century project. But that's where the world is going. And I want to be there for it.
John Vaillant, thanks so much for joining us.
Adrian, really a pleasure to speak with you again. And I'm so glad to be on your new show.
You've been listening to In Bed with the Elephant on Ricochet Media. Producer and sound engineer, Dave Sarazin. Executive producers, Ethan Cox and Andrea Houston. Music by Parker Harewood. Graphics, Connor Killoran. I'm Adrian Harewood. I'll talk to you next time.